All right, I wanted to talk a bit more about the kinds of things that you can actually configure in your XML or JSON files. So obviously, anytime when you see square brackets, that means you can configure more of something. So in this case, for example, I have just a single interface called IOperation. But if I want another one, I can just put a comma here and I can specify another type. And this can be, let's say, artifact samples.i other operation, for example. So in addition to the components and the way that they're configured, for each of the component, you don't just specify the type and the service. You can also specify other things, like, for example, whether you want the component to be auto-activated. Now, auto-activate is to do with that startable property. Remember, we had that iStartable interface. Well, guess what? If you auto-activate your component, that iStartable interface will in fact be fired. If you don't, it won't. In addition, there is a option here to inject properties. I'm pretty sure you can guess what this actually does. Sorry about the errant code completion here. That's something that comes with using a pre-release version of Rider in this case. In addition, you can specify the instance scope. So in this case, I can specify per dependency, for example. And you'll have to look up these values on the Artifact website because there is no code completion here, unfortunately, and you're unlikely to get any code completion in Visual Studio either because, well, there is no DTD for you to attach. Maybe there is something like that for XML, but certainly not for JSON. Now, let me show you how to provide metadata. Now, metadata is something that I've kind of postponed for the most part towards the advanced topics, but we've mentioned it briefly when we talked about the different implicit relationship types. So for example, if I want to specify a certain amount of metadata, here's how I would do it. So it's actually another list. So let's make a list here. And inside this list, for any single metadata element, I have to specify the key for that element. So I would specify the key to be, let's say, extra value, for example, and then you specify the actual value, and that can be something like 123. And in addition, you have to specify the type. So in this case, it's an int, and for that, I need to be very specific. So here I will say this is a system.int32, and it comes from MS-corelib. Okay, so this is how you would define a metadata a chunk of metadata that you would pass into the container, into the actual component called artifact samples.addition. So in addition to this, we can also specify the ownership. So if you specify ownership to be external, this is the same as doing externally owned when configuring the container. In addition, you can specify parameters. So parameters that go into the constructor of the component. So in this case, for example, I can specify the parameters and I can just have an object, and here I can specify, for example, that precision is going to have the value of 5, for instance. Okay, and then you can specify properties that you want to inject. So in this case, properties, and in addition to being able to inject just ordinary properties in a key value manner, it's also possible to initialize dictionaries and lists, for example. So if you have some sort of dictionary, let's call it a value dictionary, this can be also initialized just by using the curly braces and specifying key value pairs. So for example, you can have the key of 1 with the value 1, sorry about this, and the key of 2 with the value 2, for example. So this would turn into a dictionary. And similarly, if you want a list, for example, you would write some list and just provide a bunch of values. So maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. So these are some of the ways in which you can customize the behavior of your container, not by using code, but by using JSON. And of course, you have similar constructs if you're working with XML.